I'm on. Hi. I'm supposed to remind everyone to fill out your evaluation forms, which will be in your email, and to silence your cell phones. It's officially the first time I've ever remembered to actually say that at the beginning of one of my talks. So I'm Laralyn, and this is why game designers should care about metrics. I don't usually do bios, so in front of these I have too much that I want to talk about, so if you want to know more about me, it's in the GDC book or the website or something. So this is not a pro-metrics talk, and it's not an anti-metrics talk. It is a reality talk, because the reality of our situation as designers is that metrics are now a part of doing business in game development. And even if you're not involved in metrics, I guarantee you someone at your company is, or someone at the publisher is, or someone on your board is, or one of your angel investors is. Someone somewhere is looking at metrics. So this is all about why you should get more involved and how you can get more involved. One of the unfortunate things about the circumstance that we're in right now is the way metrics came to the forefront was, I think, largely responsible for painting it as a part of a pretty bleak landscape, right? So it's the landscape where bean counters look at numbers and tweak a game to squeeze the most money out of the unfortunate people who are playing it, therefore robbing them of their souls and, you know, creating this evil environment where it's all about the money and it's not about the players. But that's not really what metrics are. And if you take that view, in my opinion, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because developers, especially in online games, have been using metrics for years. This is nothing new for any of them. And it's just new for a lot of people because it came to the forefront at the same time as it was used for social games. So the same broad brushstrokes that paint social games as evil, which I also don't agree with, but those same brushstrokes have painted metrics as evil. And it's not the same thing. Metrics are inherently neutral. They're inherently a tool. So this is about how to use them as a tool to make your games better. So the first question, I've talked about metrics at a lot of GDCs, and it's probably my third or fourth one, to the extent that when somebody I hadn't met personally before but had come to one of my talks met me at a dinner, he said, "Oh, you're the metrics lady." And I was like, that's not really how I want to be known, but all right, I guess I am at this point. And one of the questions that I always get asked is, does the use of metrics take the joy out of game design? It's usually phrased much more rudely than that, but that's the essence of what they're asking me. And my response is, well, I don't know. What kind of designer are you? And I don't mean this sarcastically. This is completely sincere. And anyone who went to my talk yesterday, these are the only 2 slides that will be repeated, so don't walk out when you see these. So it depends on what kind of designer you are. Are you the kind of designer who thinks of yourself as a mad scientist? So you have some enormously awesome vision in your head, and you are going to put that vision in a game, and people are going to play it, and it's going to be awesome, and they're going to love it, and it's the best thing ever. And you're certain of that, and you just are going to do it. It's your vision. If you're that kind of game designer, yeah, metrics are going to crush your soul, because you don't care if people like your game or not. You want them to, but whether or not they like it does not affect the fact that you're going to make this game because you think it's awesome. And that's totally cool. We get a lot of innovation that way. There are a lot of really successful game developers doing that, and that's totally cool. If you want to do that, that's great. You should totally do that. But yeah, metrics probably aren't for you then. But there's another kind of designer that I think people tend to not talk about and think about. And here's an example of someone in another field who's similar to that. It is totally possible to be very creative and very respected and to do great innovative work across a bunch of different genres for a bunch of different people and be critically acclaimed and yet be very aware of what you have to do to please an audience. You can be that kind of designer and still have commercial and creative integrity. So if you're that kind of designer and you really care about what people think because you consider your role to be entertaining your audience, then yeah, you should totally care about metrics because that's your audience's way of telling you what they want. So for me personally, that is the joy in design. It's in making a game that sincerely entertains people, regardless of who those people are. And for me to understand if I'm actually entertaining them or not, I need information from them. People aren't always best at reporting their own information, though. If you've worked in community, you know that what people say and what people do and what people say they do are 3 different things. As a designer, I want an objective source of information. And yeah, I want my games to be financially successful, but I want them to be successful because people like them so much they want to pay me for that experience. And they want to keep paying me for that experience because they like it. And metrics can be used that way too. And that's really the essence of what this talk is about. So as a designer, why should you care about metrics? Well, the blunt truth is because, as I said before, someone at your company cares. Someone in your this game pipeline probably cares about metrics. And if you are not a part of that process, if the people who care about metrics are the only people involved in the process, then they're making decisions about the game's core experience without designers. And I think that's a bad idea because we're the ones who understand what we're trying to do in the game and what the player's experience should be. We're crafting that experience. Nobody should be making decisions about what happens in my game except me and my team. I feel very strongly about that. And there may be nothing any of you can do to empower yourself more in the organization. It's not about rioting and, shaking your fist. It's about becoming involved so your voice is there. So when they're discussing things like monetization, your voice is in the room to talk about how that affects the player. Because when you're not involved, you are handing the car keys to people who are not designers. And that's the thing you have to remember. Every time you opt out of a metrics meeting, you are handing the people in the meeting the car keys. And they're going to drive your car. You don't know what they're going to do with your car because you're not involved with it anymore. You have opted out. So before I go on, I want to do a couple ground rules that are going to govern everything that I say in this. And the first and biggest one is that metrics are not decisions. In and of themselves, they are not decisions. And the best example that I could think of as I was putting this together to explain this is actually the tale of Zombiefoot. So I decided when we moved to San Francisco last year that I wanted some shelves. So I got these big Expedit shelves from IKEA. And they sat around for a while. It is really that big. I mean, it was probably 100 pounds of wood, I would bet. And they sat around for a while, and then I decided one weekend I'm going to do it. I'm going to put these together. So the nice IKEA man, who told me very clearly what tools I need, also really told me clearly I should not do this by myself. But what does that IKEA man know? So I started building these shelves. And the first step, of course, is to take them out of the cardboard. So I'm peeling the cardboard open, and it starts rolling down, and now like 50-something pounds of shelves are rolling on this cardboard, and a cat goes under it. And I'm like, foot, cat, cat. And it fell on my foot. So for the next couple months, I had Zombiefoot, which I won't show you pictures, but it pretty much looked like that. And as a part of Zombiefoot, over the next 4 months, trying to figure out what the F was going on with my foot, I had 3 X-rays and 1 MRI. So now I ask you, when we think about metrics in this light, when the doctor took an X-ray, or another X-ray, or another X-ray, or finally the MRI to try to figure out what's going on, he didn't just hand me the X-ray and go, there you go. What am I going to do with this? I don't know how to analyze it. I don't know how to make a diagnosis. I can't do anything with an X-ray. So for you to act like metrics are an answer to a question is essentially the same as being a doctor and handing someone an X-ray and going, there you go. What you really need the doctor to do with that X-ray is you need him to analyze it and figure out what's going on specifically. Maybe he needs more information and he has to go back again. That's my MRI. But then you need him to sit down with you and say, okay, here's what's wrong with your foot. Here's what we need to do based on you as a person and all of your characteristics, your lifestyle, everything else. Here's the treatment plan for you. And that's what metrics are. Metrics are the X-ray. It's the analysis by trained minds that provide the diagnosis and the treatment plan. Because pure information is useless. I mean, it's the root of something, but it's not going to answer your questions. And a part of the danger of not being involved is that the people who are looking at the metrics may not understand. They may be like the X-ray technician who knows to say, hey, there's a break in the bone, but they don't know anything about you as a person or how to treat you. And similarly, other people may not know your game as well as you do. So metrics are not decisions. And I'll be coming back to that as we go through this. Also, metrics should almost never dictate decisions. I say almost because every once in a while metrics show you something that's just clear and it's busted and you need to fix it, right? Like there are metrics for server downtime. If the server's down too much, clearly fix the servers. I mean, sometimes they do actually, they don't dictate the complete solution, but they're pretty clear about what's going wrong. But that's really rare. Usually metrics are just information. And they require processing, and they require understanding. And gathering metrics is meaningless if you're not going to commit yourself and your company to processing and understanding those metrics. So how can metrics fit inside the design process? And I'm going to talk that's the rest of this talk really, is about how to become involved and think about metrics as a designer in all of the stages of development. And production is actually the most interesting because people don't usually think about them during production. Including, if you're a live game, that's obvious. But honestly, metrics can tell you a lot about DLC and sequel, especially in the always connected mode that many single-player games are in now. You can actually be gathering metrics even though it's not a live game. So, pre-production. I believe some information about metrics should be a part of the pitch. Because the pitch is really about why this game is cool and why it's the right thing for us to do. And a little bit of information about roughly what it's going to take to do it usually, right? Usually have a little bit of schedule, a little bit of key personnel or time frame or budget or something in there about this is why this game is affordable or the right fit for us. Understanding the metrics that you need to track for that game, A, helps people plan, but B, makes them want to fund your game. Because you're thinking about how to make money off of this already, right? Even if that's not what your metrics are for player experience, business people see it as you are aware of the fact that you need to pay attention to your game, and that's always a plus. More important, you can start thinking right then where metrics can help. Because if all of us will be honest about the way we develop games, I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, we know when we're guessing, right? A lot of times we're super sure about what we're saying. A lot of times we're guessing. And that's fine. That's a part of why we gain experience and get better at our guesses over time. But understanding that sort of inner sense of, yeah, I'm totally guessing about what might go right here, let's put a metrics point there, because I want to check my guess. More importantly, it totally should not be an afterthought. Metrics should not be something you start thinking about when you're right about to launch your game, because if you do, you're screwed. If you're in that situation, I'm sorry, you're kind of screwed, because it's very difficult to instrument metrics on a live game. Very, very difficult. And I have an example of that a little bit later. And that also comes in during documentation and planning. You should include in your GDD places where you need to check metrics. Specifically, you should be documenting elements that you know you want to test. Any of your goals, and this is an important thing to think about that people don't usually think about, when you're designing a game, you have in your head how the people should play the game. So when you think about, I just took a blind guess, well, an educated guess, at what's going to work in this game, you have a hunch of how it's going to turn out. So you say, I want a metrics point here. I want to track this number, and by the way, this is what I think is going to happen. I want to track this health system. I think people are going to heal when they're 25% to zero health. And then you know what you expect. And I'm going to be talking about that more as we go on, too. This is an important one. And you can work with coders on this as well. These are the things I want to know. How are we going to log that? How do we track it? Is it cumulative? Is it on the server? Is it on the client? If so, how often do I get it back? Just have a conversation with them. And they'll take it from there once they understand your logging requirements. But this is just to say you need to prompt for that conversation. Similarly, reporting expectations. Do we as a company have a reporting system? Most don't at this point still. So how are we going to look at this? It's just going to be a mound of numbers. Do we have a reporting structure in mind? How frequently are we going to run reports? How frequently do we even get the data from the servers? Because at some companies, they're surprised when you want to get data from the servers every day. So you have that conversation. But most important, as you go through this process and you're thinking about metrics up front, it means you're designing for flexibility. Because as you sense yourself saying, I think this is going to work. Okay, metrics point. Okay, I think people are going to heal when they're at 25%. Right? As you start going through that, you're kind of understanding where you have the most doubt, where you have the most questions, where your game is most innovative, where you're experimenting the most, where the market hasn't figured out what's right yet either. Right? The things that you didn't like in the game, that you just played and you want to change. So as you identify these points where metrics can help you understand what players are doing, you can also design around that and start designing so you can change your mind later. Because once you're live, or even for a single-player game or a console game, or a retail game, as you go into beta, if you have those handles that you need, you can make really broad changes. And the best example of that is that I was working on a third-person shooter, I don't know, 6 years ago, something like that. And at that point, there was a pretty big controversy in the shooter world about standard health pickups versus a Halo kind of health system where you gain health automatically when you take cover. I thought cover was the right answer because we were a cover-based game. But you know what? I wasn't completely sure. So what I did was I designed a system that with like 2 extra days of code, I could do either one. And that giving myself the flexibility once we were playing the game to completely change my mind. And if you start to think about what am I not super sure about, how can I design the system so I can not have to go back to code and admit I was wrong and change that later. But most important, if you can get everything in data for you to change later, you're in the best position to react to metrics. And if you're ever working in a situation with coders who emphasize how much quicker it is to hard code, because it is, hands down, is quicker to hard code everything. Let's talk about metrics, and let's talk about flexibility, and let's talk about how much it sucks to have a live game that's not performing well and know what you need to do and not be able to do it because everything is hard-coded. And it takes a release to make this change, because that sucks. And you don't want to be in that position. If you can get yourself in a position where you can tweak data in 2 hours and send it to the server, that's the position you want to be in. Because everything you're doing as a designer is a placed bet. We don't admit that, but it is. Our experience makes our bet right more of the time, but it's a bet. And you need, as a designer, to have the best way, easiest way, fastest way, most seamless way for players to be able to change your mind. And metrics can be what helps you understand how to change your mind. A little note on scripting. If you have a scripting system in your game, ask for a script function so you can write your own log files. And then you don't have to ask anybody else to do metrics for you. Do your own, right? Anything that while you're scripting stuff, anything you script, log it. There are other ways to do it too. You can use flags, player flags, which is a popular mechanic for MMOs. You can save variables in player data. You can write a text file to the hard drive. There are all sorts of things you can do that every time the player picks up a health pack, log it, right? I want to know, how often are people doing this? Log it with the date and the time and where it came from and what their health was when they got it. I want to know all that. One little side note, scripting is performance poor. So don't be secret squirrel and put in your scripting logging and don't tell the coders and ship with that because your game's going to be really slow in most scripting systems. So once you use it and you know it's valuable and you've proven that it's giving you good data, talk to the coders and convert your scripting to code and log in code because it's always going to be faster. But sometimes you can't get any recognition of what you need, and the best way is to demonstrate it. So the reason to do so much upfront planning for metrics is because I really believe design is like a closet. And you start out with this great plan of how everything's going to work, and then you get into development, and it looks like this. Because some things didn't work, and you added things, and the publisher wanted something, and this artist quit, so the different artist has a different style, and so you cut these animations, and you put these in instead. And it's constantly like this. That's the producer's heartache, right? Is it always looks like this. So we learned a big lesson on free roams. We were relying on a different part of the company to do our metrics, and it fell through. And we were also planning to do our own metrics. But design is like a closet. And free roams was a huge game. And you know what? We just didn't have time. Because the lesson that I have for you is, when you're looking at the next 3 or 4 or 5 sprints, and you're in a room full of people who are super passionate about the game, and you have 2 things to choose from, and one of them is like an improved animation system or a whole new mini game, and the other one is logging, which one do you think is going to win? Right? It's never logging. Never logging. Because it doesn't sound cool, and nobody understands how it helps the game. So you have to plan for it up front, and you have to be super We're careful about making sure people actively work on this. This is a part of what we're developing. Because when we launched without metrics and certain things didn't work, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's that kind of an unpleasant surprise that comes out of your cake. And there's nothing you can do about it because you can't even get good information about what's going wrong. And on free roams, it cost us at least 3 months of making the right decisions. And 3 months at the launch of an online game is your whole world. In social games, that's it, down. If it's not good, and in mobile too, actually, you kind of get one shot with a game most of the time. So if you launch without metrics, you're really risking your game dying because you didn't have the information that you needed. So how do you even get metrics when you're in pre-production? Well, there are a couple ways. Demographics, that's metrics. Metrics, pure and simple. What are people doing, buying, saying, talking about? That's one great source. Another source is other games. So you want to look at games in your space and also games that give interesting information that are not in your space but are doing interesting things. Like if I were making a free-to-play mobile game, I'd sure be looking at Zynga. Maybe, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I'd sure be looking at them. Because you're looking for data. You're looking for anybody who's done anything that you can find some numbers on to help you understand your situation. You can also look at player feedback of other games as a source of metrics because you can go through forums and look for top complaints about your competitor's game. That is a form of metrics. If the game's live, you can track their changes. This is a great Zynga example. So anytime I'm working on a social game, a lot of people on my team, usually almost everybody on my team, is playing a lot of social games. And we watch Zynga really closely, of course. I think everybody in this space does, regardless of whether or not you agree with them. And so we have this system where anytime one of us sees something new, we email everybody we know is playing. We're like, hey, look at the screen. Everybody have it? And sometimes everybody does, and sometimes half the people are like, no, I don't have that. A/B test. They're testing this. And we watch it, and we wait and see what happens in a couple weeks. That everybody has it or nobody has it. We know it won or lost, right? And you can, if you really watch the games in your space, you'll see that happen. And you can see it in single player and console games too, is you just watch them evolve. If you watch them over time, especially if there's any live version of a game that has mechanics similar to what you're doing. So if you're working on a single person console shooter, watch online shooters. Because they are changing their game to match what is successful, what people like, to get rid of things people complain about, to get rid of things that make people quit. And if you're analyzing it and you're watching it, you'll see them make those changes. WoW is a great example of the way they've changed a game to make it more appealing to players. So, of course, our ground rules apply here. So if you think about these ground rules in terms of looking at competitors' games, the message is clear. I am not saying to clone somebody else's game. The metrics that you get from someone else's game are information. It is information for you to analyze and decide how it applies to and affects your game. You may decide it doesn't affect your game at all. But looking at someone else's metrics and making that decision is thinking about your game. It's thinking about how your game should work. So production. Metrics in production is a funny thing because most people, that's when they're, or most companies, are either not thinking about it then because they think about it at the end, unfortunately, or they're trying to implement it then. But what they're missing is what metrics can provide during development. I firmly believe in team playtests, and they should be mandatory. Everybody should eat your own dog food. If you're working on this game, you should play it. And if you're doing that and you have already instrumented your metrics, then you know what? You are testing your metrics and reporting along with testing the game. And that's awesome because you know what? You are starting to gather feedback about what's working or not in your game based on what your own team is doing. And that's helpful for everybody. It helps conversations. If there's a system that half the team hates, but when they're playing it, 90% of the team actually uses a lot, shut up, right? Or similarly, if there's a system that one guy is just determined and he loves and he's stuck in the game even though no one else won it, and the whole team plays it or the whole company plays it and hates it, then sorry, dude, look at the numbers, right? So it can be a really useful thing. And more important, if you did upfront identify what your target was for your metrics, you can compare it. Are people really grabbing health packs when they're 25% health? No, they're grabbing health packs when they're at 50%. You know what? We have too many health packs in the game. Nobody ever feels like they're in jeopardy of dying. We've taken away the feeling of danger. We need to have fewer health packs. So you're starting to gather the information that will help you make better decisions. A good way to do this is a war room, which can happen for unfortunate reasons or it can happen because you want it to. I say everybody should want it to. Here's the unfortunate example of where it happened to me. So Free Realms was a super complicated MMO, and it launched with a 2-week closed beta. So we knew we were not going to have a chance to really beta test it in front of a live audience. So having no access to anyone actively leveling in the game, I took my design leads, which was probably about, design leads and core designers, probably about 12 people, and got them in a conference room and said, okay, we're going to play this start to end. I assigned the jobs, which are the equivalent of classes in other MMOs, to designers, and I said, you play that and you tell me what happens. And we had a tracking whiteboard where everybody wrote down how long they played to reach a level, how many interactions they had, how many coins they earned, how much experience they earned at every activity. More important, they gave it a thumbs up or a thumbs down and talked about their experience. And it was the best data I've ever gotten for a game before launch. Because, barring an actual real beta test, which would have been awesome, because we would have the combat designer. And by the way, nobody played their own system. I had them play somebody else's system. So we had I guess the best example is the housing designer came back and said, it took me, 10 hours to reach level 6 in combat. It was awesome. And then we had the combat designer come back in and say, it took me 2 hours to reach level 6 in pet trainer, and I wanted to kill myself because it was so terribly grindy. And so when we launched, we had knocked pet trainer down to, probably a 10th of the amount of time to level as the other ones took. We would never have known that if we hadn't had a war room where we actually tracked our own experience with the game across the design team. And similarly, you can become the player's advocate. You're probably super passionate for a part of the game that you work on. If you're a lead, you're passionate for the whole thing, right? Become a crusader. You are the crusader to make sure no one Fs with your system, right? And you preserve the player's integrity and the player's experience with your system. Define your own success criteria. If my system is working right in this game, how do players feel about it? What does it do? Does it fear? Is my system intended to instill fear if I'm in charge of, a health system? Is it supposed to motivate me? Is it supposed to get me to explore? What is my system supposed to do for players? How are players in the game supposed to feel? How frequently should people use the thing that I'm building? And most importantly, how will I know if they use it? And can metrics tell me if they like it? Now that's the holy grail. Chances are no. I'll talk later on this about ways to start to get that information, but that's the hardest one to find out. And then coordinate that with other people working on other systems. Make sure everybody's on the same page. I'm thinking if it's an easy analogy to a mini game. So if you have a game with 4 different mini games in it, you think yours is best, you want people to use it 25% of the time. Is that your goal, or do you think people should use it 50% of the time? Determine your targets, and then look at what your team is actually doing. But the hardest thing in production and pre-production and metrics is why. And metrics will never, ever, ever tell you why. They can't. So how do you start to get at the why? Well, part of it is combining metrics to start digging deeper and looking for a better answer. One way to start at that is to try to group it by different aspects of players, right? Sometimes it's by behavior, like players with long session times versus players with short session times, players who play more times a week versus fewer, players who have more friends than players who have less friends. There's the obvious, like gender, age, nationality, blah, all that stuff, right? That's the expected stuff. It's more interesting when you start combining multiple metrics to think about play patterns. What I want to know, for example, is what about those people who log in once a week and never log in again? But they still do it like once or twice every week. What is up with those guys, right? So I want to start looking at, well, who are they? Where do they live? What's their age? How many friends do they have? You'll probably start to see a pattern. Like, they're all younger players, and maybe you're not appealing to them very much. Maybe they have family playing. That's hard to tell in metrics because I don't believe metrics should get snoopy. about like friends lists and stuff, but you can tell things like maybe they're playing your game once a week but spending a ton of time in it. So how can I get them to spend more time in my game? Or maybe you'll see that the players who are only playing it once a week are the people who are buying the most stuff. So maybe you don't care that they play your game once a week because they like it. So you just need to look at it across multiple things and start to look for patterns. But once again, you have to plan ahead. Because unless you're at a really big machine of a company or a really small, new, limber company, either of which has probably mastered metrics by now, you're almost certainly in a situation where you're going to be surprised at what's hard when it comes to getting metrics. Some of your data will live in multiple databases. And you'll say, hey, I want to take session and match it against player gender and match it against spend. And they'll be like, those are in 2 different databases, and we can't compare them. Because one is by Facebook by ID and one is our internal ID and blah. No. So think ahead about what you need. Start talking to your programmers. Start asking them to help you find solutions. Another source of metrics is focus and usability tests. Along with those, you can think about friends and family testing, which if you are in a situation where you can follow my advice and have planned ahead for it and already have metrics in your game, then you're actually gathering live metrics while they play. If not, watch and write stuff down. And that's the best you're going to be able to do about metrics. But still, that's metrics even if it's rough. Focus tests, of course, with your demographic. And here's one of the most important things. If I could emphasize, number 1 from this talk would be metrics are not decisions. Number 2 would be this. Your ass should be in a seat at every focus and usability test your company has, period. If you're a designer, you should be there. Even if it's not your system, be there. And I care about it so much that I'm going to do this, because you should be at every focus and usability test. It's your game. These are your players. I don't care if it's run by marketing. Be there. Find ways to get more involved. Write the test before. Help recommend the part of the game people should be playing. And the reason I say this so strongly, and by the way, if you do focus testing or usability testing that's out of your building, like a remote service, be in the room when execs and marketing are watching it. And biz dev and PMs, be in the room. Because they are looking at what's happening in the game and they're making decisions for you if you are not there. If you are not there to say that system's broken, or if you are not there to say, look at his face, he's having fun, he's just taking his time, then they're going to be making decisions for you, and that's shitty, and you don't want that to happen, so you need to be there. And the hardest things to some of these can be actually listening and being objective about what the players are saying and doing. And it's sometimes hard to get past, but the most frustrating thing for me personally to hear at a focus test is when a designer says they're playing the game wrong. And I seriously have heard that, 6, 7 times, which is 6 or 7 times too many. They're not playing your game wrong. They're playing the game you made. You made it wrong. And if you really strongly feel that they're playing your game wrong, get another set of players in. If they do the same thing, then F you. You made the wrong game. And you just need to be objective about it and fix it if you care about your game. Or retarget it. If you made a game for 20-year-old guys and 20-year-old guys come and play it and they don't like it, and you really feel like it's a great game, bring in 15-year-old guys. Maybe they'll love it, right? And maybe you change a little of the content so it gets the ESRB rating you want and you go, right? So I'm not saying it's the end of the line. I'm just saying be objective about what people are saying to you. But don't let them make your decisions. Because the results of focus tests are information. They are not a decision. Just because players didn't like something in a focus test is not a decision to change it. It's that they didn't like it. It's information. You need to understand why didn't they like it. What was the context in which they saw it? And you know what? You won't know if you weren't there. And then use that to evaluate your goals of your system or the game as a whole. Are they playing the way I want them to play? Are they using my system the way I expected them to use it? And more importantly, are the metrics we're gathering reflecting their experience? Are we gathering metrics that tell us that people are doing something very infrequently, but when they're doing it, they have a huge smile on their face, right? This is a human experience we're talking about here. Metrics cannot represent a human experience. You need to try to find a way to merge those. So you're getting close to launch. And you're getting all your ducks in a row. And that's when you need to ask yourself, finally, one last time, how do you want people to play your game? What do I want them to do? What do I expect them to do in my game? And at this point, you should have a pretty good guess because you hopefully have been watching people play your game for a while, whether it's your team members or focus tests or an open beta, whatever it is. So you should have an idea. And as you launch, then you start to assess your targets. Was I close in what I guessed people will do? If you're a great designer, you're going to be close, 50% of the time, because people will surprise you every day. Follow up. Are people playing the way you expected them to? You probably made a guess at how frequently people would play and what they do when they came in your game. Are they doing that? And once again, be objective and honest. And where things surprise you, try to get at why it's happening. That's still the hardest part. And ask yourself, what do we miss? What data do you not have? What question can I not answer? And you will definitely know when you hit that point. And I'll have an example of that in a minute from Free Roams. Whatever it is, ask for something to collect it like now, next release, ASAP, because I do not know what's going on. We're losing players at this point, and we do not know why. It's got to be a priority, higher than any patch, higher than anything else you can do, other than an economy problem. It's the top thing to fix. Of course, always read the forums and the comments and the reviews, because that can help you figure out the why, if you can't figure it out through metrics, which is super difficult. Think about a player survey if you have a big why. What did we miss? Why is this not working? What's going on here? I can't even tell from the metrics. Try a player survey, especially if you can target it to the people who just did the thing that you don't know why the F they're doing it. If you can get a targeted survey at those people, maybe you can find out what's going on in your game. So the example from Free Roams is our players weren't leveling. So this was the week after launch when we were still in no metrics land. And players were basically, we had this huge clump of players who were just still at level 1. And the only data we had, because of the situation we were in, was that. So, really, I can't tell you why people aren't leveling if that's all I know about them. I can start to guess, right? So the first thing we started looking at was, okay, where were they when they quit? So we could kind of start to get at that. It was really tricky, but we started to get some information. We realized that, well, some of them, we can tell by their session length, they're still in the tutorial, right? Because we knew how long it took to play it. So there's no way these people were out of the tutorial yet. So we took it out. Nope. So it did a little bit. I still don't know how much harm it did, honestly, because I think it actually did some harm. The improvement was marginal. We had a few more people getting in, but 2%. It was really low. Okay, so now what? Well, what else did we have? This is in a no metric situation, remember, very low metrics. All right, where are they? And when we started to say, where are they in the world? Once we took out the tutorial, so that was no longer potentially the problem, we actually found 3 problems. So the first one, loading issues. People weren't actually getting into the game. We knew that because in a lot of MMOs, when they spawn you a little bit above the ground, so you're not trapped in collision when you spawn in. So when we looked at the actual XYZ location of our players, they weren't touching the ground yet. They had never actually successfully loaded into the game. It crashed or something happened while the game was loading. So we changed the way we counted in-game in the few metrics we had. To say in-game does not mean the session started. In-game means their feet hit the floor. So we know the game actually loaded for them. So that was a step. And what that did was it whittled the numbers down. So now we can start to understand why with our limited metrics. Second thing we learned is that people were not exploring. So Free Roams was a virtual world intended for kids, and it requires navigating a 3D world. Yeah, I wouldn't do that again, but it's what we did. So there was an issue where players were not exploring the world. And what we did to try to fix that was we added a Go There button, which may actually be on that screen. Can't tell. We added a Go There button. So every quest that you got had a little button you clicked that said Go There, and your little character would just run to that location. We also opened up teleport to any location on the map to help people get to things. The third thing we did, because now we're doing these progressively over weeks and seeing which one moves the needle, and everyone moved the needle a little. The one that moved the needle a lot was when we added an upfront sort of Disneylandish map that lets you just click on an activity you want to play and you just play it without having to move. That moved the needle a lot. But you know what? Because we didn't have metrics, it took us forever in game terms to get there. Because they just weren't leaving the starting area, right? That's the only way I had to tell that was where were they in the world, which is a terrible way to find out those three really important things. But here's the most interesting thing we found out once we had metrics is that players really just wanted a party. They didn't give a crap about quests when they first got in the game. They didn't give a crap about the world either. They wanted to get a pet and teach the pet to sit up and change clothes and dance and sing and go hit monsters over the head. That's what they wanted to do. And they could do all of that in the starting area because we wanted to show off our content. So you know what? They hung out there and they just did that. So once we actually had metrics, what we realized was a profound thing, which is these players who aren't leveling are enjoying our game. They're doing a whole bunch of things we never knew they were doing because we had no metrics. We made assumptions that they actually weren't playing when they were. We could tell a little bit of that from session length. That's why it was so puzzling. These people are playing for 20 minutes and they're still in the starting area. What are they doing? Right? There's no way for you to answer that question if you haven't got metrics. So a couple additional tips. If you can create a business case for the data you need, it will help people give you the engineering resources to do it. So as much as I hate to say it, the more you can attach any kind of business need, the better off you are from a design perspective. And what I'm saying is tie it to key decision points that you know other people care about, other people who aren't designers, right? And major factors like these, which are always important in all of our games. And if you can say, hey, if you do this fancy logging system where I can compare all of these things, I can tell you maybe why people aren't sticking in our game. And then a marketing person will say, yes, please. And people will invest resources in giving you metrics. Because what we're talking about here is really behavioral science. And not from a Skinner, I'm going to put you in a box sort of a way, but in a people are fascinating and I want to know why they're doing the things they do sort of a way. Even if you don't act on it, you have to be curious about what people are doing in your game. Everybody's curious, right? It's why all of us who make games watch people playing our games on YouTube. Because we want to know what people are doing in our games. So start to talk to other designers. How can we figure out what they're doing and what they're thinking and why they're doing it? Because I want to know how I can make them like my game better. Oops, sorry, it's going behind there. It says patterns. So combine your metrics to look for patterns, like I was talking about before. How can we know not only what they're doing, but what they're doing after that, what they did before it? It's especially important to look at that around important moments, right? Like what was someone doing right before they quit? Especially if their session length was short, especially if they're a new player. What were they doing right before they quit? And of course, once you understand what you think the behavior is, tweak really carefully and watch and see if it changes. And this is, of course, relevant to you, even if you're, like I said, a single player in or a retail game. Because understanding your player behavior in your launch game helps your team perform better and make better decisions on your next game, or on the sequel, or on the DLC, because we're all learning. And the more we learn, the better our guesses are going to be the next time we have to guess. So build a routine on your team. It's an EKG. This is your game's heartbeat. Check your data every day. Get the design team together once a week and look at the data across design systems. And really be proactive. Respond to trends. Look for spikes. Look for that sort of information. But metrics are not decisions. Don't let them make decisions for you. The equivalent of letting the metrics make decisions for you is me looking at my own X-ray and cutting my foot off, right? It's not something you should be doing. Think about it. Analyze it. If it's not your system, talk to the person who owns that system. Ask him why he thinks it's happening. And metrics are just the start of the debate. They're not the conclusion. Metrics are the easy part. What they mean and what to do about them on the hard part. And that's where the argument should be happening. Arguments about whether to use metrics or how to use metrics in terms of implementation are dumb. Just do it, because you're going to argue a lot once you start getting the metrics. Make your changes really carefully and target what you're doing and watch across the game as a whole. Just because you're changing one system doesn't mean it won't change something completely unrelated to it or that you thought was unrelated in the game. Because what we're talking about is the fuzzy nature of human behavior. And you can't predict how changing one thing is going to change other things when you're talking about people's behavior. And another important point, action is not equal to satisfaction. Just because people do something a lot in a game doesn't mean they like it. And this is an important point, I think, in discussions with marketing and PMs. Just because people are doing something a lot in our game doesn't mean it makes them like our game. So a lot of times you'll end up in discussions about whether to change certain aspects of the game so people have to repeat behavior more because they seem to like that behavior. But you know what? Maybe they don't like it. Maybe they're doing a lot because that's the only way to earn coins. And if we gave them 2 or 3 different ways to earn coins so they had variety, they'd like our game better. And then they'd buy more stuff and stick with us longer. So don't fall in the trap of saying that just because someone's doing something a lot, they actually like doing it. That may not be the case at all. So one last example, collections and Family Feud here at iWin. So we had data. It looked like players to us, it looks like not many players in terms of percentage of our player base were actually using our collection system. So we started trying to experiment with the system and improve the way it played so people would use it. And we really pissed people off. Because it turns out the people using our collections, that minority who were using them, were our most active players and loyal players. And on top of that, it was their main social connection because they were trading these collections with other people. And if we had had correlated data before we did that, we would have made a better decision. All we had to look at was what percentage of players use collections. And based on that one metric, we made a bad decision. If we had said, okay, well, who are they? How often do they play? How long do they go with an unfilled collection? Started being able to ask them more questions to get at the why, we would not have cut our foot off. And it's a good example of how getting that kind of information can help you. And why you have to be really careful about creating relationships that don't exist. It's human nature. Humans want to find patterns. We're going to try to create relationships. They may not be accurate. They may not exist. An example of that is I was asked the question about, has anyone ever looked at player spend per hour of game time? And when you think about that, that seems like a great question. No, it's not. It's not a great question at all. Because your goal is both. I want people to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time. I want them to like the game enough that they play it all the time. I want them to feel like the money they spend is well spent because they love this game and they're getting great value out of it. I don't want to think of it as I want to maximize my spend and minimize their playtime. Why would I ever want to do that? There's actually no real relationship between those two. I want to monitor them differently. I don't want to somehow feel like I'm mapping how much people like the game and how much they play it against how much they spend. I want to know both, but I don't necessarily want to compromise either one to try to improve the other. And in this case, for example, you get better results if you look at those separately and don't try to correlate. So just be aware that sometimes correlation can lead you on a path that's not really where you want to go. So in summary, you need to take control of the player's experience by being a part of the process of decision-making about what happens in your game. Or, even better, get in there and drive the process. You tell people what metrics are going to tell us if people like our game. You tell people what we need to know. You tell people how we're going to react to it. And you take control of your game. So, thank you. So, are there any questions? Questions? We have mics in the middle if there are any. If anyone's shy, you can always talk to me after. Yes?
Hi, with that game you were talking about when you found out that people were just partying and not
Yep.
exploring the world.
Yep.
So was that considered a failure for your company since that's not what you intended, or was it considered a success because people enjoyed the game?
Well, it sure was considered a failure when we took out the tutorial without knowing that that had nothing to do with what the people were actually doing. That was a failure. It just changed the way we looked at the game. We made whole party spaces. We made spaces that you could rent with in-game money and RMT money so players could have party spaces. We changed the way we thought about the game. We changed the game to match what players enjoyed doing, I guess is the right answer to that. So it wasn't considered a failure. It was considered this huge light bulb that we all wished we had been able to turn on way earlier than we actually could.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have another
Hi.
question. You said to make sure that you're present at every single playtest you
Yes.
do. I was wondering, wouldn't it also be very valuable to see if someone else can do the playtest for you and it gives you good results? So it tells you prepare the playtest really well if you didn't need to be there.
Well, you're
also.
never in the room. So if it's a true play test, you have removed yourself. If you're doing it informally at your company, put some tape over your mouth and sit in the corner. You're not there to interfere. You're there to watch. Yeah, and it makes people really nervous when there are 6 people watching them and taking notes. So that's why usually you want something like a webcam setup so you can be in the next room watching them and taking notes and shouting at them when they don't understand your game, because that's human nature. But yeah, you have to get to a stage where you're not telling them how to play the game. So if you are in the room, you have to be in a room as a silent observer. But yeah, it is. You get something out of watching someone play your game without interfering with them that you would never get if you even say a single word.
Okay. Earlier in your talk, you talked about instrumentation or actually gathering the data points.
Uh-huh.
And so my question for you is, have you had an experience where you've collected too much data? Is there...
No.
So you're fine with just instrument everything?
Yes. Well, I mean, technically, right? You have to have a coder to tell you, what's this going to do for the game's performance? How often can we do it? How is the data dumped out? I mean, I let technical people steer me in terms of that. But anytime you're dealing with metrics, the problem is really how to report on it, right?
That's going to be kind of a follow-up question was, with all of that data, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you look at that data in various contexts, right? So you have all of these data points, like how many every time someone picks up a health pack, but presumably it's important to understand what the context is in which that happened.
And it's almost always a process, because that's why I had it as a separate step to figure out what you missed, because you will. No matter how much you think you know what you want to watch for, you are going to miss some of the things that you actually need to watch for. So if you... what I usually do is I start with the things I know I want to know, the basics, right? Like, let's say it's free roams, because that's an easy example in MMO. What I want to know is average session length, number of sessions per week, number of sessions per day. I want to correlate that against age and gender, average level, average activities, parts of the world they went to, what they bought. And it could be in-game money or RMT, I don't care, right? So I want to get all of that in a pool. And then what I do as a first pass is I look at it and I say, okay, trends. I'm going to map session length to session frequency. Okay, I get that. Now I'm going to do session frequency to gender. Okay, and now I'm going to do session frequency to what they're buying the most. Do the people who play the most buy different things? And it's just really, I really just do that until I see something where I'm like, wait, what the heck is that? And it can be a great wait. Like, why are they buying that terrible item? It's a terrible item. Oh, look at that. It's got an extra 0 at the end of its damage. Well, that's why they're buying it, right? So sometimes it's those sorts of things. And sometimes it's really terrible light bulbs, right? Oh, my God, look, we're losing half our players right in that one mission. That's terrible, right? So I almost always, while I'm walking the path, get interrupted by something that I don't expect. And then you just request a deeper dive. Whatever will help you answer that question. So I start at the top with the most broad question, and it's kind of a marketing funnel look at things. People coming in, what are they doing? How many are we holding? Do they like the game? How often are they playing? All of those sorts of things. Yeah, but this guy's been waiting.
So how do you balance in-game player testing with, say, remote testing, so a user can be in their own natural environment at home, kind of just testing that? I mean, and is there do you get more reliable or more valuable information in one to the other?
So in-home testing is great because there it's actual behavior. Focus testers who are paid to come play your game will not give you accurate results. And in a test environment, no one actually does their real behavior. It's still super valuable. But I actually see the value in focus tests from me being able to watch someone play, expression, what they get stuck on, how long they stay stuck on something. Because even if you're just watching a video of it, you just see the cursor hasn't moved in 10 minutes. Did they have to pee? I don't know, right? Maybe they just were looking at the screen like, I don't even know where to click, right? But the great thing about remote testing is that at that point, it really is all about metrics. That's pure metrics. It's what you probably, if you've chosen your demographic well, it's probably exactly what real players are going to do. And you won't get that from a focus test. Because they're also, especially if there are other people in the room, especially if it's kids. One kid says, oh my God, I hate that, I'm not doing that. And then every other kid's like, I won't do it either, right? It's not normal behavior. But what you get from at home testing is actually great in terms of metrics.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm the designer, but also in a position where I have to analyze a lot of data myself.
Uh-huh.
We don't have a guy doing that at my company. I'm already pretty comfortable in Excel, but like, what should I be learning in order to do that effectively? Like, Excel has a whole bunch of statistical, functions, and like, should I be like taking classes on it, or
Yes.
what?
Because I'm the worst. I really am. I'm so clunky. I do the worst Excel. I mean, my Excel math works, but I do it the stupidest possible way.
I blame Excel for that.
So, yeah, or a book would do it too. I know there's magic in pivot tables. I love it when people do it. I don't know how they do it. So mine are always really, it's because it's just for me. I'm not generating data for other people to look at, so I don't really care how stupid it looks. But yeah, it would be good to, I don't think you need classes necessarily. I think a good book would do it. Because unless you're really interested in statistics. And if you're really interested in statistics and math, then yeah, I would say classes would be great for that, depending on if you really want to go into data analysis or being a data designer, which is a whole new job field that's opening up. If you find that fascinating, then yeah, I would say classes. Otherwise, I think a book would probably do it.
And tools-wise, like MySQL, like things like that?
Yes, absolutely. If they'll give you any access to even a copy of the database, that's your best friend. Or actually, your best friend is having a programmer who'll do that for you. But if you don't have that, then yes, I would definitely learn what SQL or Access or something that's going to help you mine the database as well. I just asked them to dump all the data into a text file, tab delimited or space delimited, and then I just read it from there.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My question is sort of in the same vein. I'm just curious as to once you've set up the metrics and you're bringing this information down, and then it comes time to actually view those metrics and analyze them, do you just use Excel, or is it worth it to get a graphic designer and some programmers and do like a fancy, flashy visual style that anybody can read?
It depends on who my audience is. That's such a designer answer. Sorry.
Coworkers within the.
To be honest, this sounds terrible, but I'm just going to be blunt. It depends on how much I need to sell people on my view, right? If we all know there's a problem and we just want to look at the numbers, then screw it. Excel with an Excel chart, look there, no one's leveling. We knew it, right? But if I want to prove a point that we've argued about and people disagree with me and I have to prove it, then I am going to make that look good. And I'm going to triple check my data because, wow, that's embarrassing. If you actually have bad math or your chart's not comparing the right stuff, right? If you're presenting to a board, if you're presenting to a publisher, if you're presenting to an investor, then yes, absolutely, invest in a programmer and a graphic designer. And in fact, if you really want to get investment for a game or you really want to get the board on board, you actually code a reporting system where it spits out the data, you push a button, and there's your chart.
Right.
And they will invest in your company. Oh, hi.
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in that conversation. I'm a game user researcher, electronic arts, and we find a lot of value in visualizing the data. Like, I agree, metrics says a lot. You need to know stats, because if you apply the wrong stats, you might modify the whole meaning of that. But especially for people who doesn't have a strong background in stats and want to jump into that really, really fast, visualization is a really good first approach.
Yes.
There are certain softwares like Tableau that you can just pretty much, seriously, drag and drop metrics. And it would be a first insight to your stats. And really enjoy your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have time for one more. I have 3 minutes. So, I think it's you.
I just wanted to second that Tableau business. We use Tableau a lot at my company, and it works really, really well. It's really easy to use the data, or to visualize the data.
Great. It's great to see more and more companies actually providing that as a service. So that, I mean, you still have to instrument it in your game, and that can still be something that gets put off to the last minute, unfortunately. But it is great. And if I'm working on a social game, I try to get hooked into Contagion from day one. So even while we're playing it, we're looking at the Contagion numbers, for example, or whatever service Swerve, whatever you use. Anything else? Great. Well, thanks, everybody.